Hey everyone, welcome to a new type of video that's going to be a recurring kind of series on this channel where I'm just going to be making like general MTG guides, I guess you can call them. So in this specific video, we're going to be talking about sideboarding, how to sideboard, but specifically with a mid-range deck. And honestly, I'm going to split this up. So I'm going to make a few videos on sideboarding to really encompass each style of deck because I feel like they sideboard a lot differently. Even though I'll be giving a lot of generic pointers, so you can apply that to like every deck. But the more in-depth aspect of this video is going to be focused more on a mid-range deck that has a secondary game plan in the sideboard, kind of. So for this specific example, a Mardu mid-range deck that has a creature or permanent game plan, and then post-board can go on a more controlling game plan with a lot of card advantage and destruction and disruption, etc. So this will be more focused on this. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and click the like button. It helps out a ton, and it really will encourage me to make more videos like this if I see that it's well received. And you can subscribe to my channel for more videos. Let's just jump right in. Okay, first up, in general, you want to ask yourself, am I on the play or am I on the draw? Which is usually a simple question to answer, at least for most people, I would assume. But yeah, some cards in your deck, in a mid-range deck in general, just do not perform as well on the draw as they do on the play. So in this specific deck, for example, you would have cards like Wedding Announcement and Steel Seraph, which are cards that are very good when you have an advantage, and that advantage would be being able to play first. So Steel Seraph comes down, generates pressure a lot earlier than your opponent could potentially deal with, and Wedding Announcement needs that time to develop itself. So this matters in specific matchups. But in general, you want to ask yourself that. Once you've solved that problem, quote unquote problem, now you can move on to what am I playing against? And the answer to that is also relatively simple. If you know the metagame in general, you've figured out what your opponent's playing, you should know what archetype you're playing against. So you could be playing against creature-based aggressive deck. You can be playing against a creature-based mid-range deck with no real alternate game plan. That would be a deck like Rafine. But let's just generalize it to creature-based mid-range. Then you have value-based mid-range, which usually does not focus as much on creatures and focuses more on non-creature permanents that also generate a lot of value or board presence. Then you have control decks. You have very specific control decks like mono white. So let's say permanent based control, which would be a deck like mono white that actually plays a lot of permanents. So like Wedding Announcements, Bank Busters, Steel Seraph, Wandering Emperor. And then you have non-permanent based control decks, which are going to be extremely focused on a few key cards, but the rest of their deck is going to be non-creature based. So a lot of instants, a lot of sorceries, and a few threats. So a lot of counterspells, a lot of removal. I think that was 5 archetypes. Aggro. Well, the burn style of aggro is I don't know. That's pretty straightforward to sideboard against. I don't know if I need to go into that. Alright, I guess I could. So let's do this. Creature-based aggro, burn-based aggro, creature-based midrange, value-based midrange, but all midrange decks are based on value, but more value-based midrange, so not really focused on creatures that much. So Grixis, there you go. Perfect example. Control, like permanent-based control deck, and straight-up classic control, let's call it. 6 archetypes. There you go. Okay, now that you've figured out what archetype you're playing against, and if you're on the play or the draw, the third question you should be asking is, how easily can they deal with my permanents? So how good is their interaction? And the answer to that question will decide whether or not you're going to be keeping your permanents that are vulnerable to removal spells post-board. If the answer is yes, you will most likely be cutting them. And if the answer is no, you'll probably be playing them. Unless you have better cards, but we'll talk about that later. Next question is, how important is it for me to deal with their permanence? This question has two facets. Number one is my opponent going to curve out and just run me over? So they're going to go like creature on 2, permanent on 3, like Kiki, or let's just say creature on 3, or something that represents board presence on 3. Same thing on 4, etc., etc. So are they going to play every turn, and can I keep up with that? The answer is no. You need more interaction. And then second facet is, am I playing against a deck that is not going to necessarily curve out that strong, but has a specific card or a few specific cards that I really need to answer, or I'm going to lose the game? Field Red against Grixis, for example. If the answer is yes, you need more interaction. At least more than you would otherwise against decks like that. Okay. That's question number 4. Now, kind of question number 5 is, do I have tech cards? Tech cards that come in for this specific matchup to do a specific job. That'd be cards like Unlicensed Hearse, Loran, and Duress. I guess we can, honestly, or Farewell. Let's not talk about Duress. Actually, Duress I feel like is a little bit different. But it does accomplish a specific. Oh, fine. I'll throw in Duress. So tech cards. Actually, no, let's not throw in Duress. Okay, whatever. Okay, tech cards. Wait, what number was that? Okay, whatever. Next point. I think this is point number 6. Okay. Point number 6. Do I need disruption? So this is where Duress is going to come in. This is going to be the last point, I think. Disruption means that you have no way of dealing with specific spells from their hand once they're cast, and you need to stop them from resolving those. That'll be cards like Duress in black, and cards like counterspells in blue. That would mean that if the answer is yes to I need to make sure they don't resolve something, you have to board in disruption if you have access to it. An example of cards you would need disruption for would be Invoke Despair, Farewell, Depopulate, Wandering Emperor, any Planeswalker, Wedding Announcement, etc. I mean, non-creature spells for the most part. Because creatures you can destroy with interaction, and non-creature permanents, there's also some interaction that deals with it, but that's a little bit more nuanced. But anyways, that's it. Okay, that is, I think, six total questions that you should be asking yourself every time. If you're not comfortable with sideboarding, go through those and you'll figure out what you need to board in and when you need to board out. Now let's go a little bit more into specifics. Starting, I'm going to go over each archetype and how to sideboard with against them generally. Let's start with Burn. An aggro burn deck. An aggro burn deck is going to run a few creatures, deal some chip damage, finish you off with Burn, the classic. Now, when you're on the play, your general game plan, if you're playing creatures, is to simply crush them. Force them to be so far behind, because usually burn decks have trouble like setting up a board from behind to attack you. If you're attacking them, they have to play a little bit more defensive, because most likely a mid-range deck will be able to take over relatively quickly due to their more powerful mid-game threats. So you want to crush them under pressure. They're going to keep your creature game plan almost entirely intact and board in a few removal spells for your very expensive creatures, because you want to close out the game as fast as possible. Do not give them time. Crush them. Board out your expensive spells, board in some interaction, and you're good to go. That's on the play. Now on the draw, it's a little different. On the draw, this is where Burn pretty much instantly wins unless you have cards that are ready to counteract their Burn. That would mean life gain. Now, in a metagame where Burn is actually good, you will have cards in the sideboard for Burn. That's just how it is. Now, unfortunately, in Standard, we aren't really prepped for that, because Burn is kind of bad in general, but if you face a Burn deck, better hope you have some life gain somewhere. In this case, we do. Archangel. So you're going to need on the draw. So you answered, am I on the play or am I on the draw first? So that's on the play. On the draw, you're going to want a lot more interaction, and your goal is just to survive, I guess, until something sticks and you've removed their entire board, and then it's that creature versus the world, pretty much. Oh, we have Shield Red too. Or whatever permanents, because you're gonna need to answer their creatures when they're on the draw, because you can't develop creatures when your opponent has board advantage against burn, because then if they kill your creature, that burn, instead of hitting your face, it's hitting. It's kind of difficult to explain, but like instead of hitting your face, it's hitting your creatures, but it's technically hitting your face because it's letting their creatures go through. But you're never dealing with their creatures because you're playing a creature, they're killing it, they're dealing damage. You're playing another creature, they're gonna kill it, you're gonna deal damage. So what you need to do is kill all their creatures, and then they're left with burn. But then usually if you've killed all their creatures in a perfect world, they wouldn't have dealt enough damage where their burn's going to kill you fast. So you play a creature and then they're like, I might lose the race to this single creature. I have to kill it. And then once they start spending burn on your creatures, but they have no board, then you're in a good position. And then you win the game. Actually, we have Steel Seraph too. Okay, never mind. This deck is okay against Bear. Just saying. I think I got my point across. All right. Creature-based aggro decks. That would be soldiers or mono white, or in a different metagame, I guess. But let's say soldiers. A deck that has no reach, only creatures, and some removal spells. Against that deck, when you're on the play, it's kind of similar to when you're playing against burn. You just bury them under. You bury them under your better mid game, essentially. Because they're going to play a bunch of small creatures. You're going to play 2-drop, 3-drop, big creature. And then their lack of removal is going to hurt them, right? Because if they don't answer it, usually that creature can take over the game. And you're also going to board in a few like sneaky sweepers, a few removal spells, but not that many. Like you would probably board out your expensive creatures again, as we said, against aggro. You don't want to drag out the game too long, but just enough to take over. So you're gonna cut like one owl, maybe like Sanctuary Warden, maybe, I don't know, like Wedding Announcement. All the slower cards you want to cut, basically. If you're on the play, the slower cards are okay, but again, on the draw, you got to make sure those slower cards are not that present. So on the play, just crush them. They don't interact very well for the most part. A deck like Soldiers has like nothing for Giada. This generates too much value. They're gonna lose. And then you have sweepers. Like it's just too much. They can't deal with you being proactive and having cards that just annihilate their board with like Brotherhood's End, if they're not the ones pressuring you, because in this case you will be pressuring them. Okay, that's that. So cut some expensive stuff, cut some slow stuff, board in a little bit of interaction, and especially your sweepers, and you're good to go. Now on the draw, it's a little different, because the dynamic is you are behind. When you're behind, you can't lean on your mid-range creatures, because then they'll have a bigger board, and then if they kill that creature, you're taking a ton of damage from all their creatures attacking at once, which is really bad. So there, when you're on the draw, you need to board in every piece of interaction you have. Like instead of boarding in like a few, everything comes in. Sweepers especially come in, no matter what. You have to board in every sweeper, and keep all your early game in. You might even have to cut even more late game cards or mid game. Anything above 4 mana, I think. So 4 is okay, but 5 you're getting on the little bit risky. And slow cards like Wedding Announcement, that's a no-no. Like slow Wedding Announcement on the draw, against a typical aggro deck, it's not bad, but you have to consider cards like Thalia, that will just absolutely destroy you. So if they have no Thalia, Wedding Announcement is not bad, because it does generate chump blockers every turn. It buys you a lot of time for you to get to your sweepers. So let's assume you're playing against a creature deck that somehow isn't playing Thalia. That would be in a different metagame. You could play a slower card like Wedding Announcement, because technically it is slow, but it's also generating a lot of life because it's chump blocking. So if you think the chump blockers are relevant and you can get this down on 3 reliably, it's okay. That's not the case in this current standard, so that's a no. Anyways, that's the general strategy. Next, creature-based mid-range deck. So let's take a deck like Rafine, a deck that is trying to curve out, but it's looking to go a little longer than an aggro deck. It's looking to, in the mid game, play like very huge threats that can just win the game by themselves, while still pressuring you a lot early game by curving out perfectly. That's their goal. Threat, 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 threat on curve every turn. You remove something else, you're out of removal. The third thing comes down, you lose. That's their game plan, at least. So against that, when you're on the play, most mid-range decks have a strategy it's actually very similar to playing against an aggro deck. But the removal you're going to need is less about the sweepers and more about the spot removal, because you're trying to remove A threats. So you want to pressure them with your creature game plan, because they don't really have that much access to removal, because they also have their own game plan. That's a little different with Rafine, because they have no choice but to be a little bit more reactive on the draw. So they'll have more removal spells ready, but you can run those out pretty easily since they won't have that many. So you want to be the proactive player. You want to present your threats. Threat, threat, threat. Remove their card, attack in, because you're on the play. So that's your game plan. Maybe board out. No, you want to keep your mid game. I would say, yeah, you want to board out the cards that they can deal with extremely easily. So yeah, pretty much the same as boarding against aggro, but instead you're going to want to, cut this sweeper and cut a few of the slower cards, because again, your goal is to just bury them, because they won't have enough removal to deal with every threat that you have, and you want enough removal to deal with their threats. So Soul Transfer would be coming in, Wandering Emperor would be coming in, Destroy Evil would be coming in, and you'd probably look at like 2 Wedding Announcements and a Brotherhood's End pretty much. So it's a very simple way to build. You have your core game plan, stick to it, board in a few removal spells instead of a few cards that are a little too slow in the matchup, because you want to speed up since you're on the play, and they have low amounts of removal. All right, now when you're on the draw, that's obviously a little different. On the draw, I really have to respect their curve. All your removal spells come in, and maybe even Farewell, because they're slower than aggro, so you can get to that 6 mana and just sweep them. If you're playing, no, we're talking about a creature deck, not the Wedding Announcement version. Okay, I'll talk about that later. So you're not boarding in duress. Removal spells come in, you have to cut the slow cards. Again, same thing. It's just that they're going to go fast, really fast. Not as fast as aggro, but pretty damn fast. Cut a little bit of your top end as well. So you're going to want to cut this. And I would board in the Soul Transfer, the Wandering Emperor, the Farewell, the Destroy Evil. And I think actually the Brotherhood's End, you might even want to keep it, because really, you want to make sure their 2-drops don't stack up too much. And also, they have Wandering Emperors, so you could potentially, get kind of run over if you don't have a way of getting rid of it reliably. So that would be what I would do. On the draw, you just cut the slower cards. That's a recurring thing that you're going to hear from me. If you're on the draw, slower cards out, unless you're in a really grindy matchup like Grixis, which is exactly what we're going to talk about next. So the next on the list is the mid-range deck that relies more on non-creature spells and less on creatures. So a little trickier, a little trickster, So against those types of decks, it's a value battle. Now, play draw doesn't really matter that much. It kind of does when you consider Fable, but there's not really much you can do about it other than boarding in duress. The problem is that it's really down to the draw. It's really down to who draws better, not the draw, but you know what I mean. It's down to who draws better, really. You can have some positions where you outplay them if you know they have a counterspell and stuff. It's really hard. It gets too in depth. We're just talking about sideboarding. So sideboarding. You answer the question, do they have... So question number 3 was, can they deal with my threats easily or my permanents easily? And the answer is yes. They can deal with creatures easily, but not non-creatures, so that's good. Creatures, out. The creatures with no ETB. Now, question number 4 was, do I need to remove their stuff? And the answer is kind of. So they only have the shield reds that you really want to remove. And the problem is that you need enough removal to answer it. So you're going to need a little bit more removal than you might want, just because you have to make sure shield red does not stick. That's something you have to consider as well. Then tech cards. We have tech cards. Unlicensed Hearse, and Loran is pretty good. And then Disruption, and we have Disruption. So there you go. We went through all 6 questions there. Once you figure that out, pretty easy. Oh shit, I cut dress. Well, yeah, once you figured that out, it's pretty easy. Just cut the cards that you just figured were bad because they can deal with them easily. The game is lagging. Okay, there we go. And actually, I think we're gonna have to cut a little more than this because this is not yet. This has to go, and this is just worse. Oh, I forgot. Oh, whatever. There was another point, but I guess I'll go through it now. I forgot one more thing, is that cards that have the same purpose as cards in your main deck, but are just better in that matchup, those will automatically immediately swap. Destroy Evil for Go for the Throat in certain matchups, Soul Transfer for Go for the Throat, or Infernal Grasp, or whatever. Removal spells being interchangeable with another one that's just better in that matchup. So consider that. Same thing with creatures. Some creatures are just worse in certain matchups, some are better. Either way, against Grixis, 4 Duress, 2 Hearse, 2 Loran, Soul Transfer. What is that, like 9? 4, 2, yeah, that's 9. So at least 9. And we have 10, which is actually perfect because I wanted a Bank Buster too. There you go. There's 10. Okay, so we've gone through the questions. There you go. Play draw doesn't really matter. It's pretty much the same thing every time. It's just a value battle. Good luck. Control decks. So I'm considering mono white a control deck, even though it could be a mid-range deck, but I feel like it plays the control game plan every time. So I'm just going to call it control deck. So against mono white control, they have permanence. Dynamics a little different. In mind, the play on the draw doesn't really matter against mono white. It's a value battle. It's very similar to a mid-range deck, but it has like huge sweepers that you need to be careful of. So it's pretty much the same thing. Can they deal with my creatures? Yes. Easily. Loran, be very careful. Do they have... Okay, so I guess another question, it's pretty narrow, is do they have a card that decimates one of your cards? And the answer is yes. Loran just annihilates this thing, so let's not play it. Even though it dodges Wandering Emperor. Okay, there we go. We've got that out of the way. Next is, do I need to kill their creatures? Yes. Yes. Owl, Sanctuary Warden, Sarah Paragon potentially, and the answer is yes. So you need Destroy Evil, Soul Transfer, Wandering Emperor, and Loran, of course. That counts as a tech card. So tech card Loran comes in, we know it's good. Bankbuster 100% comes in, and Disruption. Yes, we want to stop them from using Farewell. We need Disruption. So 4 Duress comes in. That's about it, pretty much. I think you could cut into wedding announcements, a few of them. They're not that good. So honestly, I think if we need to, so this is 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Farewell comes in, super good card in this matchup. So 12 would be 9 here, and then I guess 3 from here. I think that's it. Sure. 1 wedding announcement. All right, that sounds good. There you go. Quickly figured that out. That's at some point you'll be able to bam, 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 cut cards, bring them in. Pretty simple, but that's why I'm here to explain things. Okay. So that's what you're gonna do against that type of control deck. Now, non-permanent centric control decks. So something like Dimir control, Esper control, I don't know. Decks that have a few permanents that are really good, and then they just rely on instants and sorceries and all that other nonsense that doesn't generate board presence. Okay, that's just a pure value battle, and they can remove things extremely easily, so you have to make sure every card in your deck is extremely resilient to removal spells. It's all about card advantage, but you still have to pressure them. That's the tricky part, is that you need to pressure them, because if they don't get pressured, they will draw a million cards and they will bear you under card advantage. So you need to pressure and make sure that your pressure is not that weak to removal, and especially sweepers. So you got to make sure you're... it's just too much. It's a lot. Actually, against control, I would not board this in. Maybe something like this. So you still need cards that generate pressure, but you got to make sure that you either have enough threats to where they'll run out of removal, or I'm just going to assume the control deck's playing sweepers because otherwise it doesn't make sense. Or you have to have so enough threats that they run out of removal, or threats that don't die to removal easily. And you would board in everything that has to do with card advantage and disruption. Very important, because disrupting your opponent means that you have an opportunity to sneak in a creature that doesn't die or a permanent that doesn't get countered, something like that. And then that can snowball. So you have to snowball against non-creature control or non-permanent control. Fortress comes in, Bankbuster in, Laurent maybe in. Again, tech card, you have to ask yourself, does this hit anything? Is this for this matchup? Soul Transfer would come in because this doubles up as a removal and can get something back from the graveyard, which is fantastic. Wandering Emperor, non-creature permanent, doesn't die to removal, it qualifies, it comes in. So 1, 2, let's go without Laurent for now. 1, 2, 3, 4, plus 4, 8. 8. Archangel Wrath just doesn't do anything in these matchups. It's not bad, but it's not good enough. Actually, it's probably better than Steel Seraph. So let's do, that's 5, and I said 8. So definitely cut, I think I'd cut the Giadas every time. That's 8. Yeah, I don't mind keeping the Archangels of Wrath because they have they kind of have ETB. I mean, they do literally, but it's not that good. It's just kind of there. But giving yourself reach is kind of good. So honestly, why not? I think this is how I'd board. Again, play draw doesn't really matter, because they'll have, for the most part, they'll have ways to deal with your stuff anyways. So no matter if they're on the play of the draw. All right, and I think that's gonna do it. So yeah, go ahead and leave your suggestions for guides you'd like to see down below in the comments, and I will see you guys in the next video. See ya.